The fourth generation of video game consoles, while mostly known for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, had quite a few other competitors, such as the Neo Geo, the Philips CDI,
my boy,
and what is commonly agreed to have received a distant bronze medal, the TurboGrafx-16 by NEC, also known as the PC Engine in Japan. While it was a mild success, selling around 10 million units, it paled in comparison to the Genesis's 35 million, and especially the Super Nintendo's 49 million. As was often the case with consoles from that era, it also went on to receive a variety of add-ons, with the most notable one for today being the Super CD-ROM 2, which was home to what I believe to be the PC Engine's most iconic title, Castlevania Rondo of Blood. Released exclusively in Japan on October 29, 1993, Rondo of Blood remained a relatively obscure title to Western Castlevania fans for the longest time. It was only really in the year 2007 that the game would finally get more mainstream attention, as that was when Castlevania The Dracula X Chronicles released on PSP, which not only included a complete remake of Rondo of Blood, but the fully translated original version as well. Since then, Rondo of Blood has often been at the center of discussions regarding the best classic Castlevania games. It is right up there with the likes of Castlevania 4 as a definite fan favorite. But unlike Castlevania 4, I'm not sure if I've ever heard anyone talk negatively about Rondo of Blood before, though that might have to do with it being slightly more obscure. This is more of a Castlevania fan's Castlevania game. My first time playing Rondo of Blood was on Castlevania Requiem for the PS4, a 2-pack collection that also came with the game's chronological sequel, Symphony of the Night. I remember enjoying Rondo back then, but not thinking much of it. However, it already has been a few years, and I have been quite itching to replay it. So with that said, this is a video I was quite excited to work on ever since I started this marathon. Rondo of Blood is a game that, despite its popularity, doesn't really get talked about that often, so I guess now it's my time to maybe get this discussion a bit more active. I'll be playing on an ISO of the original PC Engine game, patched with the PSP translation. This does create a few syncing issues in the cutscenes, but far from anything game-breaking. I'd rather play it this way than just in Japanese. If you end up enjoying this video, I would highly appreciate it if you give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second to do and it means a lot to me. So please and thank you. But without further ado, this is Castlevania Rondo of Blood. So, what is the scariest language? If you answer German, then Rondo of Blood's opening is just what you need for some good old pant-pissing.
Vor langer Zeit lebten die Menschen glücklich und zufrieden.
It shows us the events leading up to Dracula's centenary revival, with worshippers of the dark sacrificing this here maiden to bring the oath into fruition. The game never really touches on these dudes again, but boy, they sure are some evil sons of bitches. He can become a bat, fog, or wolf and fists. We never see him become fog or a wolf, but trust us, he can do that. On human blood, Lord of Darkness, Master of Castlevania.
Dracula, der Fürst der Finsternis, Herr des Teufelsschlosses, ist auferstanden.
Starting up a file, this is where we get a bit more into specifics. Well, sorta. You see, Rondo of Blood features fully animated and voice-acted 2D cutscenes. These are used by the game to tell its story. However, many things are never really explained and can kinda just be gathered from seeing events play out. But if you have the manual, you are given some brief character bios, which do assist in piecing things together. So I'm just gonna give you the premise as it is without leaving too much out. Rondo of Blood finally moves us forward in the timeline. It is the year 1792. It's been roughly a century since the events of the very first Castlevania, aka Vampire Killer, aka Super Castlevania 4, aka Castlevania Chronicles, and we are now placed in the shoes of this Richter Belmont to take center stage.
I'm Richter Belmont, the Vampire Hunter.
When it comes to the Belmont clan, Richter is such a breath of fresh air. Up until now, all Belmonts have been these stoic, orange-clad barbarians that basically all look the exact same. But this is century number 18, baby. Fashion has moved on since the days of Trevor Belmont, and Richter is absolutely rocking that over here. Easily my favorite protagonist yet. In contrast to the orange donning a blue getup, which does wonders making him stand out, I'd also like to note that Richter isn't actually that old. When this game takes place, he's only 19, and his less reserved, more easygoing personality is really nice to see, even if it doesn't get much time to shine. But Richter's got his work cut out for him, as not only did Dracula return, but he has kidnapped 4 maidens: Maria Renard, a young girl descendant from a family of vampire hunters; Tara, your local village nun; Iris, a daughter of some doctor I guess; and Annette, Richter's girlfriend. We're getting straight hunted castle in this bitch, as Dracula is keeping them hostage, presumably for sacrifice, leaving Richter no other choice but to save them if he wants to achieve 100% completion. And so the adventure begins, as Richter sets out on coach to give Dracula his whipping once more. The game begins with this awesome cinematic, showing us just how much of a badass Richter Belmont is. The cutscenes here are beautifully animated, and definitely get you pumped up to get things done. I do really dislike that they're unskippable, but they are also pretty short, so it's not too big of a deal. I still greatly enjoy them either way. However, there is something here that I, along with many other Castlevania fans, take issue with. And that would have to be the art style on display here. It's not something that can really be seen within the actual games themselves, but rather through promotional material. Castlevania up to this point has always had this rough, gothic aesthetic to it, which fit it like a glove. I haven't gotten to talk about that much in these videos, but I love the box arts of classic Castlevania. It's nothing I would hang on a fridge, but these all have some beautifully put together illustrations, Rondo of Blood included. This here's a really nice cover art. However, this does not well reflect what we actually see in the game itself, as Rondo of Blood has this really cheap and generic 80s anime aesthetic. I'm not really one to enjoy anime, or hate something for just being anime, but I think many would agree with me when I say that this sorta art style does not fit a series such as Castlevania, making it look far cheaper than it actually is. And remember this topic, because let's just say this ain't the last time I'm gonna be touching on this. But regardless of the art style in the cutscenes, Rondo of Blood still manages to be one of the absolute best looking 16-bit games ever made. It's got a real cinematic flair to it. Not only is the HUD far smaller and less intrusive, giving the visuals more room to shine, but the game also immediately grabs you with its prologue, Stage 0, featuring Richter dashing through the woods on horseback, encountering death much sooner than expected for a brief preview of things to come. You trade some hits with him and death runs away.
Next time, it won't be so easy.
After that, the game continues to throw impressive set piece after impressive set piece at you. The sprite work here is absolutely sublime, and a lot of it would basically be cemented into the rest of Castlevania's history, as even as late as 15 years after its release, the series would keep reusing sprites dating all the way back to Rondo of Blood. The style was defined here. The roster of enemies in Rondo is so expensive, to the point where the very first level has these 2 enemies right next to each other, that in this game literally only appear here and never again. I really don't get what the point of this plant is, but I'm not complaining. When it comes to environment design, however, part of me honestly does prefer Chronicles, and that's not to say the environment looks bad in Rondo of Blood, not in the slightest. All of the backgrounds here are absolutely rich with detail, and my god does this game love parallax scrolling. However, I do feel that many of these areas do come off as a bit blocky and flat. Chronicles had a lot of 3D sprite manipulation which I really enjoyed. It gave the levels more depth. But in Rondo, most things are kept relatively straight, So at this point, I would go on to say that I still think Chronicles is the better looking game, if it wasn't for Rondo of Blood's absolutely ridiculous attention to detail. There are so many little environmental touches here that are bound to be missed by most players, yet the developers put in anyways in order to flesh the areas out. For example, Stage 3 has this room with some candles in the foreground. Now most would likely assume that this is just a cute little detail, as the place is seen to contain quite a lot of these candles in the background. However, if you have the axe, then you can actually destroy these candles and get items from them. Just how rad is that? Stage 4 then contains the staircase section, which has a bunch of dropping iron balls, some ridden by annoying flamens, and this part isn't just some wacky platforming challenge, as you can literally go behind the scene and see that all of these balls are actually part of a moving conveyor belt, with this poor guy over here who's not even an enemy making sure they all go back down. What would usually be just another obstacle is actually given in-universe setup here. Near the boss room back in stage 3, there is this decaying skeleton, and it will have a different reaction depending on whether you just go up to it or attack it. Now think about that for a bit. How easy would it have been for the game to just have the skeleton normally disintegrate when whipped? It would not be something that anybody might see as an issue, but this here is proof of going the extra mile, as whipping the skeleton will knock it over to the wall before it disintegrates. Now, I know that this is an astronomically small component, but these sort of things are absolutely all over the place here, making Rondo of Blood, more than anything, feel like a truly sincere labor of love. But all of that doesn't really matter much if the game itself isn't good. So now it's time to talk about the handling of our main man himself, Richter Belmont. Using Castlevania 1 as a foundation, Richter can once again only whip in front of him. The jumps are also kinda locked, but you can sorta influence their trajectory by changing directions mid-air. It's kinda weird, but for what it is, I think it works. While Richter may seem a bit limited at first, he does have some of his own techniques which greatly come in handy. Not only can you jump on stairs, but you can now jump off them as well, basically making staircases a complete non-issue here. While Castlevania 4 Simon was built around tricky platforming and area control, Richter over here supports a base moveset specializing in one-on-one enemy confrontations. Rondo of Blood has some of the biggest and beefiest enemies yet. The knockback here is actually determined by what hit you, so while some attacks will barely have you flinching, others will knock you all the way over to the other side of the room. It can get pretty scary, but thankfully, Richter Belmont supports this brand new backflip move. By pressing jump while ascending, you can execute a pseudo backwards double jump. This here is something that, to most people, will initially seem as kinda pointless. And for a while I was on that boat too, but after playing Rondo of Blood for this video, I found the backflip to be extremely enjoyable to use. Not only does it feel great dodging enemy attacks with it, but it can also be used to skip many areas altogether. And again, when you use it to great effect, it is really satisfying. The animation work here is just so smooth. Other than that, Richter can also lock onto a direction by holding attack. And again, this is mostly useful for combat, which is the best it's been yet here. But of course, it wouldn't be a Castlevania game without sub-weapons. And in this regard, Richter also has some cool new tricks up his sleeve. First of all, it should be noted that the whip upgrading is gone. From the moment the game begins, you have the chain whip, which is longer and faster than ever. To be honest, the whip upgrading never really added anything to the older games. It was kinda just something annoying that you needed to take care of after dying. So I think Rondo of Blood doing away with that was a smart move. But as for the sub-weapons, the entire roster from the original Castlevania is here and accounted for. While the axe and cross act as they always have, the others have gotten minor changes. Instead of staying in place, the holy water now treads along the ground. The stopwatch only slows enemies down instead of freezing them. And the dagger is finally awesome now, supporting a bigger hitbox and traveling at light speed, while I'd still more than likely take the cross over it. When dealing with annoying smaller enemies, the dagger is easily the ideal choice. But other than those 5, we once again have a brand new sub-weapon, the Bible. Yes, a literal physical copy of the Holy Bible is a sub-weapon. It costs 3 hearts to use, combos, and attacks in this weird spiraling trajectory. Yeah, I'm not really that big on this one. It can definitely be useful for when tackling bigger enemies or whenever you're surrounded, but I'd still rather take the more consistent cross or holy water. And thankfully enough, Rondo of Blood made it so that when you pick up a sub-weapon while already possessing a different one, the discarded sub-weapon will momentarily drop to the ground before disappearing, removing that annoying issue where you accidentally grab a really crappy weapon and have it replace a really good one. Now usually, that would be the end of the story. However, Rondo of Blood decided to introduce one of the coolest new gameplay elements the series has seen in a long time: item crashes. You'll notice that when you pass a certain heart threshold, your counter will begin to glow. If this happens, that means you have acquired enough ammo to execute a deadly item crash. The move you'll pull off and how many hearts it will consume depends on your current sub-weapon. If you don't have any sub-weapons, you can execute this flame whip attack that honestly isn't really that useful, as most of the time you're gonna be holding onto sub-weapons anyways. And with sub-weapons, most of these will come in the form of devastating screen nukes that will absolutely destroy any enemy you come across, with the two best ones being the Holy Cross and Hydrostorm. They are expensive, but god are they satisfying. The stopwatch actually also has an item crash, usable for a stupendous amount of 30 hearts, which is a lot. But it basically throws a bunch of projectiles onto the enemies, leaving them little room to escape. This practically lets you play as death. Just how awesome is that? Thanks to this inclusion, I can say without a shadow of a doubt that the sub-weapons are at their best here. All of them have very viable practical uses, and being able to say that is really nice. It's also nice to be able to say that Rondo of Blood's level design, and I'm sorry for coming off as a bit predictable here, is easily the best in the entire classic series. It's got just the right amount of combat, the right amount of platforming, the right amount of difficulty. As for Castlevania standards, Rondo of Blood is a hard game, but I wouldn't call it cheap. Beginner's traps are at a minimum, and there's not much here that I would really call bad per se. The balancing is ridiculously tight. The levels in Rondo of Blood are actually designed pretty differently than those of the previous games. While at base level, you are still killing enemies, whipping candles, and making your way toward the penultimate boss, Rondo of Blood actually adds quite a bit of non-linearity into the mix. Many of the stages here have alternate routes. In level 4, for example, you can either go through the staircase with the dropping balls I discussed earlier, or you can try your luck with this deadly spike trap filled room. Both eventually take you to the same place, so whichever path you take is just whatever you feel like. In a quite frankly shocking turn of events, Rondo of Blood almost completely does away with bottomless pits. Some holes will still be filled with water or these weird grabby hands, and as expected, dropping into these will lead to death. However, on a variety of occasions, you'll get knocked into a pit, only to discover yourself in a completely new area, filled with its own unique challenges and obstacles. I do kinda wish the game was a bit more consistent regarding what's a bottomless pit and what isn't, but nevertheless, this sort of level design is really cool. I'd recommend taking a look at some of the level maps at CastlevaniaCrypt.com, an awesome Castlevania fan website which I link in the description. It's cool seeing the whole thing in front of you, allowing you to really appreciate what they were able to create here. Now I highly doubt that this part's intentional, but this sort of open-ended level design almost kinda reminds me of Vampire Killer all the way back on the MSX. That game also had a big collection of open-ended levels with set beginning and end points. Rondo even brings back these small keys that you need to use to open some locked doors. There is definitely at least a bit of resemblance here. However, the main difference is that unlike Vampire Killer, Rondo of Blood is actually good, and it gives more of an incentive to explore these stages. Most of the Castlevania games so far had these money bags hidden throughout the levels, which were there purely to increase your score. However, Rondo of Blood actually gives them a purpose beyond bragging rights. Collecting them will now increase your credit, which you could then use to buy strategy videos showing how to beat the bosses. Yeah, this is kinda lame. It's just your generic Castlevania Rondo of Blood, all bosses, parentheses, no damage YouTube video, purchasable within the actual game itself. I spent a solid hour grinding these out, only so that I could confidently tell you that it is not worth it. But alright though, let's get into the real reason to explore here. All Rondo of Blood stages numbered 1 through 4 have secret exits, with stages 5 and onward being more traditional in design. I'll use the very first level, the village ruins, to demonstrate the structure here. Playing through it normally, you'll end up getting to this castle area, where you have to defeat a wyvern in order to finish the level. Stage 2, the entrance to Castlevania, will then ensue. However, back in the village ruins, going through this breakable wall near the end of the town section will lead you to this totally different bridge area, where after defeating this water dragon boss, you will continue on to alternate stage 2, the lake bridge. Both stage 2s also have 2 exits, and while being totally different levels, they both do share the same bosses. The regular exit will have you fighting the werewolf and continue to stage 3, and the secret exit is housed to the bone golem, which when defeated will send you to alternate stage 3. You can basically think of this as another take on the split pathways from Dracula's Curse, only this time you actually have to find them yourself, instead of being faced with the eternal dilemma of up versus down. And some of the locations of these hidden routes are admittedly pretty clever. The game also supports this nifty level map, letting you freely select whichever stage you'd like to tackle, which means that going through all of them in a single playthrough is completely doable. So overall, this is another neat feature that furthers the game's replay value. I like how the main stages all mostly take place within Castlevania itself, while the alternate stages have you going around it with more wacky set pieces. Alternate stage 4 has this giant water slide, and it is easily one of the coolest parts in the game. How can anybody not love this? However, there is one final thing we're looking for in these stages. As mentioned earlier, Dracula has 4 maidens held hostage, and saving them is completely optional. It mostly just gives you cutscenes and a slightly different ending. Again, most of them are kinda just there. Terra is found in alternate stage 3, Iris in alternate stage 4, and Annette in stage 7, who despite being Richter's girlfriend, really doesn't do much of anything here. On the other hand, a character that does do a lot here is the hostage found in stage 2, Maria Renard. She has an official last name, so you know she's gonna be important. After rescuing her, Maria is unlocked as a fully implemented playable character. Yeah, I'm not joshing you here. It would have been cool if there were more playable characters, like maybe the other hostages, but Maria is very fleshed out, supporting a bunch of altered sprites when played as. For example, instead of pot roast, Maria will find a variety of sweets used to heal her. It's mostly that sort of stuff that makes the game more cutesy. Unlike Dracula's Curse, you cannot switch between characters at will, but seeing as Maria serves as the sort of easy mode, I do think it makes sense from a balancing standpoint. You are given the option to switch characters after a game over, so if you're having a tough time with Richter, then Maria is always there to back you up. In all honesty, this does feel a bit more like a joke inclusion than anything, as the idea of a little kid going out and defeating Dracula, completely unfazed by anything that's going on, is a bit ridiculous, even for this series. However, Maria can be completely ignored if you want to, so I don't mind the tonal shift here much. And regardless of that, Maria does add a lot to the game, supporting a playstyle which is completely different than Richter's. She has a shit ton of utility, being able to run on ground about twice as fast as Richter, as well as just roll around like nobody's business. This crumbling bridge section at the beginning of level 7 is a pain to go through with Richter, as you're constantly being hunted down by annoying giant bats. But with Maria, you can just stroll right through the whole thing, while not being able to strafe around like Richter. She does have a double jump in place of his backflip, and I don't think I even need to explain why that's extremely useful. When it comes to offense, Maria has a bunch of animal companions straight out of a classic Disney movie there to help her wreak havoc. For her standard attack, she sends out these pigeons that can somehow deal just as much damage as Richter's vampire killer. The pigeons are slower and don't have as much range as the whip, but Maria can attack while moving around. Also, after being sent out, these pigeons will return to Maria, working as a sort of semi-boomerang, and thanks to that, when used in close range, they can rack up a ton of damage. Where Maria really devastates, however, is with her sub-weapons, the 4 sacred beasts, themed around Chinese mythology. Instead of the dagger, she has these red birds, which kinda functions like a multi-directional axe, And speaking of, the axe is replaced by this cat who will run forward annihilating everything that comes its way. The cat shows no mercy. Anyways, moving on, there's this turtle in place of the holy water, and instead of being an attack, using this will give Maria a shield, protecting her from all damage. However, once it is active, all you can do is just slowly move around, meaning I honestly didn't find much use for this one. The final of these four is easily the most powerful, the dragon replacing the cross. It is simple and straight to the point. Dragon moves forward, massive damage ensues, and I do mean massive damage. I'm pretty sure that this is the strongest regular attack in the whole game. My only issue with it is that its icon is so big, as to the point where it actually blocks your heart counter, and yeah, that is really annoying. As you'd expect, all of these weapons have devastating item crashes, with the dragon supporting the most expensive move in the game, requiring a whopping 50 hearts, but it can pretty much kill anything it goes up against. I wouldn't be surprised if this can one-shot Dracula. Maria also has these egg and music book weapons, replacing the stopwatch and Bibles respectively. But honestly, these are really not much to write home about. The sacred beasts are pretty much better in every way, but that's not even everything, because Maria actually has one final super secret special move, the Guardian Knuckle. You're supposed to learn about it through watching the most expensive tactics video in the game, titled Lollipop for some reason. The move is actually executed kinda like a fighting game attack. You need to press up, then down, circle to the left or right, and finally press attack. Successfully executing this maneuver will have Maria send out this rapidly punching girl in the corresponding horizontal direction, which, as you would expect, does a lot of damage. So yeah, Maria is kinda overpowered. She does have less defense than Richter, making her more vulnerable, but defense doesn't really matter when you're not gonna get hit anyways now, does it? I honestly find the biggest enemy when playing as Maria to be myself. With how much versatility she has, it can be pretty easy to get reckless as her, but regardless, playing as Maria is still a blast. While she is completely busted, the game remains engaging all the same, and let me tell ya, playing through Rondo of Blood as Maria after finishing a playthrough with Richter, easily one of the most euphoric experiences this series has to offer, but nevertheless, playing Rondo of Blood is always euphoric, because oh my god, this soundtrack is fucking incredible. Much like Chronicles on the PS1, Rondo of Blood supports CD quality audio. It does sadly create an issue where instead of properly looping, the music just stops and resets every 3 or so minutes. But I can forgive that, because said music is so good. We've got our typical remixes here, Vampire Killer, Bloody Tears and Beginnings. Not gonna lie, these tracks are starting to get a bit old by this point, but to be fair, I still love them. The game actually contains a remix of Cross Your Heart, the opening song from Haunted Castle of all games, and it goes completely unused, which blows because it is really good, but not as good as Rondo of Blood's original tracks. These are some of the best tunes in the entire Castlevania series, coming together to make Rondo of Blood the greatest of the soundtrack scene yet. I adore this stuff. And speaking of areas where Rondo excels, as if we don't have enough of those, the bosses are by far the best the series has ever seen. As I said, Richter is highly capable in combat, and these encounters are a great showcase of that. Unlike previous entries, the bosses here all have checkpoints put right in front of them, meaning they can be designed with you having full health in mind, and due to that fact, they are far beefier and support deadlier attacks than ever. The Bone Golem is pretty easy, but but the battle itself is split into 3 different phases, making it potentially scary. Dullahan is an absolutely terrifying headless knight. If you aren't ready, you will be obliterated, but he does have patterns that can be learned and exploited. One of the more unique opponents here is Carmilla, returning from Simon's Quest. I love how the battle starts with her original mask from that game, only to soon shatter, revealing her new form. This is so neat. She functions similarly to how she did in Simon's Quest, flying around and shooting down projectiles, but while you're battling her, you also have to deal with her assistant, Laura, who will chase after you and drain your hearts. Once Carmilla is defeated, Laura will switch to her combat attire, and you'll have to take care of her to finish the battle off. Which reminds me, some of the bosses also have these desperation attacks used once out of HP. These can thankfully never kill you, which honestly does kinda defeat their purpose. I'm guessing that they originally were supposed to be able to knock you out, but the devs realized that beating a boss, only to then anticlimactically die, would be really annoying. So they kept them in despite not serving much of a purpose. I mean, I guess you can get an extra life if you defeat a boss without getting hit. However, that's already its own ordeal. But now, let's start to head into endgame territory. Stage 5 is weird. Well, not the actual level itself. It has the serious standard death fight, which is even more epic than usual, seeing as you've already encountered this asshole in the prologue, and this is quite possibly his toughest incarnation yet, with the second phase where he gets right up and personal with you. Dude, it is such a cool boss. But anyways, what I do have issue with is alternate stage 5. In order to access it, you need to have already beaten Dracula, which is something that is never even close to hinted at. And on my first playthrough, this really frustrated me, because I was able to see that the level was there, but no matter how many times I beat Carmilla, the secret stage 4 boss, I'd always just be sent to the regular stage 5. And as someone who wanted to have played all of the stages before finishing the game, that majorly bothered me. Nowadays it's whatever, kinda just a bit annoying. The only reason I even bring this up is because I need to find some stuff in this game to complain about, damn it. Alternate stage 5 is probably the hardest in the entire game. It doesn't have a boss battle, but instead a series of brutal platforming and enemy gauntlets. It's basically the penultimate challenge of everything the game has taught you. And I mean, it has the absolute gem that is Opus 13, so I can't really complain much, now can I? After beating stage 5, we see this cutscene of Annette being confronted by Dracula in her prison. And man, I really don't like Dracula in this game. I don't know, his design here just feels off to me. I think he looks too young here, just blabbering on about how freaking savage the world is. This isn't the worst Dracula design in the series, but it is definitely one of my less favorites. Dracula hears about Richter and Maria's intrusion thanks to his third in command, this freaking purple robe known as Shaft, a dark priest who you go on to battle in the very next stage. And dude, he summons the bosses from Castlevania 1. You have to beat them all in a row in order to confront him, but they all have completely new attacks. And the music that plays is a remix of the Castlevania 1 boss theme, which is purposely orchestrated to sound like it came right out of the Famicom. Why is this game so freaking good? Rondo of Blood released in 1993, only 7 years after the original Castlevania. Yet it carries its legacy, as well as the legacy of the entire series, with a ginormous amount of honor. It's a love letter to literally every single facet of the series. The amount of Easter eggs and references to older game series off the charts, and they made sure to highlight them throughout the video, though the stuff I mentioned here really only scratches the surface. It even has a bit of Kid Dracula's goofiness in Maria's cutscenes, and also that. I mean literally, what more could you ask for in a classic Castlevania game? After the boss rush, Shaft himself is pretty pathetic. You're given a checkpoint between him and the other bosses, so if you come to his fight with full HP, then he really doesn't stand a chance. Though he does return as a ghost in the next level, where he is definitely far more formidable, attacking with the skeletons of previous opponents. But with that geezer out of the way, it's finally time for what we've all been waiting for. Dracula. Round 7. There's a hidden staircase near his boss room, reminiscent of the one from Castlevania 4, though this one only has money, so you're still gonna have to go in as intended. In all honesty, the final boss isn't really that remarkable in this game. It's the standard two-phase affair, with him starting by teleporting around, until later turning into a giant monster. And while the design of Dracula's second form, as well as the accompanying background are both... Ah, damn it, I've run out of synonyms for amazing, haven't I? Well, the battle itself is still hard, and as always, it is satisfying to take Dracula down. But what I'm getting at here is that it really doesn't do much different than the previous track encounters. But hey, I guess why fix what isn't broken? As we take Dracula down once again, concluding the battle of 1792. The ending has Dracula spewing on about how it's humanity who called him forth, and that they're all evil beings ruled by desire. Honestly, it's kind of just a bunch of empty hub-hub. While there is more dialogue, Rondo of Blood's story, I feel, isn't really interesting enough for me to really delve into. The ending is also barely any different if you save the hostages. All they really change is whether Richter rides back on horseback or on a coach, which in all honesty is pretty damn lame, and a touch anticlimactic. Some of the later Castlevania games definitely have stories that I do have quite a bit to say about, but as for Rondo of Blood, bleh. I guess that's why I actually quite enjoy Maria's ending, where Dracula's monologue is almost the exact same, right down to calling her a Belmont, but Maria clearly does not give two shits about anything he's saying.
Once again, the blood of Belmont has defeated me. Perhaps this, too, is part of my fate.
It's your fault for being so mean to everyone.
Maria then proceeds to escape the collapsing castle with her animal companions, and the cartoony ending sequence ensues. I guess Richter just canonically died in this timeline, but I mean, what more can I even say? This was Castlevania Rondo of Blood. During this revisit, it kinda hit me. Rondo of Blood is quite possibly one of the greatest 2D platformers of all time. I know that this video has been kind of overwhelmingly positive, but in all honesty, that's mainly because I didn't find anything to criticize. And even at that, most of the issues I raised with things like the story and art style, at the grand scheme of things, are really just nitpicks. Because when it comes down to it, Rondo of Blood is practically a perfect Castlevania game. And I'm not one to use the word perfect lightly. Rondo of Blood is not only an amazing side-scroller, but for a Castlevania fan, it is everything you could ask for in a game. The definitive classic Castlevania experience. I recorded footage for it like I would any other game, but when I made it to the final boss, it occurred to me that I emulated the game with the wrong aspect ratio, as seen by the background of the Dracula battle having a broken line at the top. After I noticed this, I did not hesitate to go back, fix this, and play through the entire game all over again, only so that the footage could be consistent. And so I went on and recorded the entire thing in a single session. If that doesn't go to show you how much I adore this game, then I honestly have no idea what will. As if you even need to ask. This is my favorite Castlevania game we've looked at so far, and let me tell you, it is not even close. And I love Super Castlevania 4, but it is not even on the same league as Rondo of Blood. And you know what the best part is? This is not even in my top 3 favorite Castlevania games, but that's a discussion for another day. And speaking of different days, next time, we'll be taking a look at Castlevania Bloodlines, which coming off of Rondo of Blood, also stands on its own as quite the interesting installment, so I definitely recommend tuning in for that. And until next time, have a good one.